interrupt this program to bring you Courage, the Cowardly Dog Month.
Whole month of Courage, the Cowardly Dog. First appearing in 1996, it was picked up by Cartoon Network, who work in the middle of Burbank, and directed by cartoonist John Dilworth. Though many years have passed since the original air date, it's now time for Zack to celebrate this great show.
Well, old sport, what do you think? Neat.
Hey guys, Zack Mars here, and welcome back to Courage Month. So today, these next two reviews we're going to be reviewing are going to be Nowhere TV and Mega Muriel the Magnificent. So let's get into both of those. Okay, so this first episode, Nowhere TV, actually showcases the return of Quack. If you guys don't remember, he's the secondary antagonist who was introduced early in the first season. But in any case, he comes back in this episode. And the episode is set up like this, where Eustace is actually has a what he believes to be a winning lottery ticket. The lottery number is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is very straightforward. But that's kind of the joke. But in any case, Eustace is happy because he believes that he's actually going to win the lottery, and he's not wrong about that. But I'll get to that in a minute. But in any case, as Eustace is celebrating what is possibly a winning lottery ticket, there's suddenly a knock at the door. So Muriel and Courage go to answer it, and they discover that Quack has actually since escaped from police custody from the end of his last episode, and has since taken up his con artist job again, this time returning as a TV repairman. And his plan is to it's very apparent that he's actually trying to do something with the TV, but and Courage actually recognizes Quack from their last encounter, so he's very reluctant to let Quack into the house. So he kind of growls at Quack a little bit, but and Muriel even doesn't recognize him at all, mainly because she had amnesia the entire time that first episode. But she remarks that their TV is fine and that they actually don't need a TV repairman. But Quack just hands them his card before he leaves, and then immediately after he sabotages their TV so that the TV actually breaks and they're forced to call him. So he goes up to the roof. He actually saws their antenna in half so that the TV stops working. And Eustace is insistent about how they don't actually need Quack's help to actually fix the TV, and tries to fix it himself. But when the TV quite literally explodes, from Eustace's interventions as he's trying to fix the cable, he decides that they should probably hit up Quack on his offer. So they call up Quack, who comes in to actually start doing repairs on the TV, but Courage doesn't trust him and is very much careful to keep a close eye on him. But Quack insists that he can't work like this, and actually insists that Courage leave the house so that he can actually have some privacy. And while Courage does heed his requests, he does try to keep an eye on him through the front door. But Quack merely pokes him in the eyes, and Quack winds up sending Courage scrambling. So Courage, realizing he's not going to be able to actually observe Quack and figure out what he's playing that way, instead decides to actually sniff around the house and actually figure out what's going on and why and what Quack could possibly be playing that way. And eventually he winds up near Quack's quote-unquote repair truck, and discovers the severed half of their antenna next to Quack's truck. And realizing Quack was likely the one to sever it, he then proceeds to bring it to Muriel and show her and tell her that what Quack did. But she doesn't fully understand, believing it's just a really fancy stick, and asks and tells Eustace to go and play with Courage by fetching with the quote-unquote stick. But not only does Eustace insist that he doesn't want to actually go and fetch with the dog, he then realizes that what Courage is holding is actually the end of the antenna, and realizes the antenna was likely broken, but it comes to the wrong conclusion about who actually broke it, and it concludes that it was Courage who broke it, and then kicks him out of the house. At which point Quack finally finishes his quote-unquote repairs and then leaves, and Eustace wonders what he actually wants for his payment, and pointing out and kind of grumbles to himself that obviously Quack is going to want to be paid. But Quack points out that he doesn't really require payment, at least at the moment, and then chuckles to himself before he gets into his car and drives off. At which point we find out what Quack's plan actually is, which is that he actually kind of monkeyed around with their TV box to hide hypnotic suggestions inside the TV programs, so that Eustace and later Muriel would actually wind up being hypnotized by their TV and would quite literally try to do whatever it is the TV told them to do. So Eustace is the first one to fall victim to it. Quack appears on the TV and tells Eustace to get rid of Courage. So Eustace decides that he's gonna go. So Eustace, under hypnotic suggestion, decides he's going to go out and go play with Courage. And indeed he is. He goes out to actually go fetch, which is much to Muriel's surprise. But then she winds up falling victim under the TV as well. And at which point Courage wonders what exactly Quack could actually be planning. But then Eustace comes out, rips out a piece of fence board, and shoves it into Courage's mouth, and then flings him off a cliff. But Courage manages to survive and actually comes back to the house. But by this point, Courage, Eustace, and Muriel are actually completely under Quack's mind control. So the TV is now suggesting that they actually go out and steal the lottery money, which, if you guys remember, is what Eustace was after at the beginning. But and Eustace is now wearing a wetsuit, and Muriel is now wearing a clown outfit. And Quack insists that they go out and steal the lottery money for him. And Courage, realizing that the TV is the problem, and that there will be continue to be under his mind control as long as the TV is in the room, tries to dismantle it, but quickly finds out that the TV won't turn off or can't be unplugged. So Courage just picks it up and throws it out of the house. So but in any case, as he's dealing with the TV, Eustace and Muriel actually get into Eustace's truck and proceed to drive off. So Courage actually chases after them and actually tries to follow after them in a hang glider, but he winds up running into the Bagge's windmill instead, and he winds up getting spun around so hard that he actually gets launched all the way to the building where they actually store the lottery money, and winds up in the bag of lottery money as the Bagges are actually coming to rob the place. And sure enough, Muriel, using her juggling skills that she demonstrated in a previous episode, actually winds up distracting the guard while Eustace again under Quack's mind control, climbs in through the sewer system, and actually winds up climbing in through the girls' bathroom. And the guard is distracted, but he does hear all of the things that Eustace is doing in the building. But Muriel insists that nothing is happening. But in any case, Eustace does eventually track down the lottery money, pick it up, and with Courage hiding in it, and then winds up stealing it. And Courage, in an effort to try and avert the theft, actually pulls the alarm while Eustace is in there. But it is at this point where Muriel actually knocks the guard out so that he doesn't actually hear the alarm, using all of the heavy objects that she's been juggling. And at which point Eustace just walks out of the building and they get into the truck. And Courage, realizing that he's now no longer going to be able to be any help, realizes that they're actually heading to Quack's lair, and decides to actually use the lottery money to leave a trail for the cops to follow, so that they actually go and arrest Quack. And it winds up working. The cops actually show up. Note that the guy is unconscious, but notes that there's nothing out of the ordinary except for the trail of money, and decide to actually follow it. Meanwhile, Quack is actually prepared to feast for Eustace and Muriel for their job well done, as it were. And when they come in, he notes that the bag is almost entirely empty, save for one piece of money. And at which point Courage then hands to him. At which point Quack opens the bag, looks inside, and discovers that Courage is actually in the bag instead of the money. And Quack is annoyed and a little bit furious, pointing out that he thought he got rid of Courage, and proceeds to chase him around, tries to strangle him, but Courage actually responds by poking Quack in the eyes like he did at the start of the episode to Courage, and then runs into Quack's back room, which is full of old TVs that he's presumably all tampered with as well, and has actually it's been implied that he's been doing this for a while. But at which point Quack and Courage actually get into a fight where they attack each other using the various TV programs as projectile weapons, which is really, really, really funny and really clever. Like, for example, King Ghidorah from the Godzilla movies. He shows up on the TV programs at one point, and he shoots fire. And also there's a bunch of other skits that actually wind up running on the TV, which are all just a series of projectile weapons where they fling arrows, pies, and a whole bunch of other things back at each other, and eventually Courage manages to nail a Quack with a pie, which he points out is annoying, but then he realizes too late that there's actually dynamite in the pie, and he winds up blowing up. At which point the cops actually manage to follow the trail to LeQuack's lair and completely ignore Eustace and Muriel, and wind up going straight to LeQuack, who they find in the back room, alongside the back room full of destroyed TVs. And after arresting LeQuack, pointing out that they finally caught him, they then proceed to thank Courage for his job well done and his work in actually bringing down LeQuack. And Courage just kind of chuckles to himself because he's delirious from pain, but he does give them a thumbs up and does appreciate their thank you. At which point the hypnosis is undone and the bags with Courage actually return back to their farmhouse. At which point Eustace wins the lottery. But as it turns out, and this is implied because LeQuack actually did sabotage it so that he could steal the lottery money, thanks to LeQuack's intervention and because of the theft, the lottery money has actually gone down significantly to whatever the Nowhere Newsman has in his pocket. So Eustace becomes frustrated with his TV and winds up throwing it out of the back door. But when the TV lands, it actually switches to a view of LeQuack, who has actually escaped from the prison he was held in. So he winds up escaping, and he once again reiterates that we haven't seen the last of him. So yeah, this episode marks the return of LeQuack, and just the fact that he uses a TV this time around to actually try and hypnotize people into stealing things for him, which is an interesting premise. And obviously this marks one of the few times where Courage actually recognizes that LeQuack is indeed up to no good and actually does recognize him from a previous encounter. This hasn't really happened much, considering the only other recurring-ish antagonist has been cats, but yeah, it is interesting that Courage hasn't really this is the first antagonist that Courage has actually recognized and realizes is probably up to no good. So yeah, and to be fair, it was entirely Courage's fault the first time, so he would probably learn from that mistake. But yeah, it is interesting that Courage is immediately distrustful of LeQuack, despite this being kind of a floating timeline, and there's very rarely any continuity, if ever. So it is kind of interesting that that's indeed a thing. But in any case, that's my review of Nowhere TV. Onward to the next review. Okay, so this episode, Mega Muriel the Magnificent, marks what I believe is the only time the computer himself has actually become an antagonist. So, and it's kind of interesting because there's a reason why the computer is an antagonist in this episode. So it starts off with Courage actually typing his memoirs into the computer, and the computer keeps interrupting. The computer keeps pointing out that Courage is just a very scaredy cat baby, and it very much points out that he shouldn't be scared of half of the things he's written, and also all of the things Courage is actually typing into his memoirs are actually things we've seen, are actually threats that Courage has actually faced in previous episodes, like how he faced off against Black Power Queen, Freaky Fred, a couple of others. But in any case, the computer points out that all of these that the difference between himself and Courage is that he's a computer. He doesn't have emotions, and therefore he feels that human emotions make them weak. So and remarks that if he had a body and legs, he would actually show everybody how it's done. But Courage merely remarks that Courage merely bluffs him off and then flips the switch that turns the computer off, much to the computer's chagrin as he tries to protest, but Courage just turns him off because he's clearly just spitballing and isn't actually going to do any of the things he sets out to do. So with that, Courage stops writing his memoirs and goes to bed. However, that night there's actually a thunderstorm which wakes Courage up and causes him to panic in the middle of the night. So he clings to Eustace for protection. But Muriel merely points out that it's just a thunderstorm, that it'll pass eventually. So she invites him to actually curl up with them under the covers. But as it turns out, Courage had a very good reason to actually be afraid because the lightning storm actually hits the Bagge house, which brings all of the appliances to life. It causes them to kind of act up and kind of go off on a mind of their own. Specifically, the computer, which pulls itself out of the wall now that it no longer needs to be plugged in, and also grows legs, which enables it to actually move around. The computer, happy that it now is able to actually walk around, decides that it actually is going to show everybody how it's done. At which point, Muriel believes she hears a knock on the door and tells Eustace to go investigate, so he goes downstairs and actually goes to go see what it is. And he doesn't see anybody at the door, so he just slams the door shut. At which point, the computer shows up and actually attacks Eustace and tries to take over his body, which is what the computer's plan actually is. The computer's plan is to actually get itself an actual body so that it can actually show everybody what it means to actually be fearless and what it means to actually be courageous. So with that, it then proceeds to hijack Eustace's body. And now in Eustace's body, the computer proclaims that it is now invincible and proceeds to get ready to try and run through a wall, but it finds out that Eustace's body is too frail to actually facilitate what it needs, and Eustace's body just kind of falls apart with everything except his head being scattered everywhere. And the computer, after realizing that Eustace is too frail, realizes that he needs a body with more meat on its bones. So he re-uploads himself back into its main body and goes out and decides to go after Muriel and abduct her. So Courage actually realizing what the computer is very much a threat now, proceeds to actually chase after it, and also finds out what happened to Eustace in the process. Since Courage was worried that something had happened to Eustace, but then he realizes that Eustace is now broken up into pieces. But in any case, by the time Courage gets down to the living room, it's too late. The computer has actually hijacked Muriel's body, and now that he actually has a body, he points out that he's going to show everybody what it means to actually not be afraid. And with that, the computer now in Muriel's body and now wearing a Daredevil outfit, starts calling itself Mega Muriel the Magnificent and actually runs out of the house, destroying the living room wall, destroying Eustace's truck and the barn in all in one fell swoop as it runs off. And Courage isn't entirely sure what the computer is planning, so he just kind of decides to sit tight for now until he can figure out where Muriel actually is. At which point Eustace, who the computer's apparently propped his head up in his chair, Eustace points out that now Mega Muriel is actually going to launch herself through the moon and into Mars. So Courage realizes that he has to go and stop Mega Muriel. So he goes to go confront the computer and climbs into the cannon to actually stop him. But the computer merely points out that Courage is clearly just going to show off what it actually means to be courageous and be fearless. And Courage, realizing he can't talk the computer out of it, instead just clings to the computer's head, to Muriel's head, and the computer launches himself out of the cannon and through the moon, which he successfully does, but not all the way to Mars because they're actually swatted by the dino with the racket from the space dino with the racket from the 1000 Years of Courage episode, and they wind up landing back on Earth. And by this point, Courage is actually very badly injured, but he manages to hobble his way all the way back to the farmhouse. At which point Eustace points out that Mega Muriel is once again performing a stunt, and that she's actually going to be jumping into the San Andreas Fault. With the Nowhere newsman actually just commentating on the whole thing. And sure enough, Courage actually shakes off his bandages and actually manages to get there as Mega Muriel is about to jump into the San Andreas Fault, and also Floyd is there for whatever reason, and apparently he has a seismograph handy, so he's asked to actually run it while the seismograph is actually about to go off. But he actually does manage to actually observe when the San Andreas Fault is about to go off, and Courage, realizing that the computer is about to jump in, actually pulls out a hover pack with a propeller, but it's ripcord powered and he can't get it to turn on, so he decides to just go screw it and just jumps in after Mega Muriel. But as Courage is actually falling, the computer actually decides to taunt Courage a little bit more, pointing out that he just showing him a mirror and showing how scared he actually is. And Courage doesn't deny that he's very scared. But in any case, it turns out there's nothing to worry about because the San Andreas Fault, in addition to causing the the fictional town of Hollyweird, which is just supposed to be in universe Hollywood. A bunch of stalagmites burst out of the ground, and Mega Muriel winds up being fine. But then Courage actually winds up falling off and injuring himself even worse. So he winds up wheeling himself back to the house. At which point he finds out from Eustace that Mega Muriel is once again planning to go for a skiing to do another stunt. This time skiing down the Empire State Building and into a sewer. So Courage realizes he needs to go and save her as well, and actually grabs a bungee cord. At which point the computer decides to mock Courage again, pointing out that humans are so very puzzling to him because Courage is clearly shaking like a leaf, and yet he has enough bravery to actually come up and try and save Muriel. But in any case, the Mega Muriel then proceeds to skate down the Empire State Building, with Courage trying to catch him with a jump rope with the bungee cord they actually brought with him. But in any case, it is as they're actually skating down. Mega Muriel is someone actually opens the window and actually fans out the curtains, which Mega Muriel hits and winds up going flying into a power station. And then Courage kind of goes through the blanket and winds up falling into the sewer, but winds up being launched into the power station as well. At which point, Courage hears the computer calling for him, and the computer is in denial about any of it. But the computer actually notes that it is actually scared for the first time, though it's completely in denial of it. But it does point out that without saying it's scared, it says that it's scared because it's currently sitting in a power station, and it's currently stuck in one of the terminals. And points out that if there was indeed a power surge, which is very likely considering they're in a power station right now, points out that it could get wiped, and it could cause problems, and it could die. So it asks Courage to actually rescue him. So Courage does exactly that. It actually managed to get him free by chewing through one of Mega Muriel's skates, which enables the computer to actually set free. Though Courage gets electrocuted a little bit. And is actually launched free from the power station. With the Nowhere Newsman just watching on the top of his camera and asking Courage how it feels. But Courage is too stunned to actually say anything, so Mega Muriel actually picks him up and carries him off, and the Nowhere Newsman really remarks about how fearless Mega Muriel is and how kind and compassionate they are, and then falls off his camera because he realizes that he's leaning too far forward. Yeah, currently just to reiterate, he's sitting on top of his camera. He looks down into the camera and actually tell everybody his thoughts, and then he falls off because he leans too far forward. But in any case, with that, Eustace actually remarks that this is just a running gag where Eustace is actually falling in love with Mega Muriel. So he's a little bit confused as to what Mega Muriel actually is and what kind of stunts they'll pull. But he then kind of concludes that she's kind of useless if they're trying to befriend a dog. At which point the computer still in Muriel's body actually walks in, picks up its old body and actually carries it up to the attic, and states that human lives are so boring and that he's tired of being a human. And then after placing itself back in the attic, it decides that Courage can have Muriel back and re-uploads itself back into its main computer body. And with that, Courage then goes back to decides to actually show after plugging the computer back in and setting everything back up. Courage decides to show Muriel the memoirs and what he's been working on. And Muriel is happy that Courage is so very creative and actually is writing down his memoirs, but wonders how it is actually going to end. So the computer actually intervenes on his behalf and writes, "And then they lived happily ever after," which Muriel is happy with. But Eustace is still complaining because A, he's ahead, and B, he's currently waiting for Muriel to actually make dinner because he's annoyed and hungry. So yeah, this episode is kind of interesting in that the computer actually becomes an antagonist in this episode because because this has been established. It feels like fear is kind of unnecessary and it isn't really a big fan of human emotions because obviously it's a computer. It makes perfect sense. So it goes full HAL 9000 and just tries to show everybody how it's done. He tries to take over a human's body. And he becomes a stuntman for an episode before eventually realizing that Courage isn't the absence of fear, but rather taking action despite fear, and then it returns back to its normal life, deciding that human lives are boring and it never wants to actually feel fear again. So yeah, it decides that having no emotions is better than actually being in a human body and actually experiencing human emotions. So that's how this episode ends. But in any case, yeah, these last two episodes were actually kind of interesting, and I did enjoy them. So hopefully you guys enjoy them as well. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well if you want to help support me. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that I'm always saying thanks. So be sure to check this out in the description below as well. Also, since this is a very big project, I would very much recommend if you did that, because if I want to do more of these, and if you want to help support me that way, by all means, link is down in the description. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon down in the description below as well. Well, not my Patreon, but be sure to check out my Twitch down in the description below as well, because not only am I trying to fill out a milestone where I need 50 people to actually go and follow me over there, but on top of that, I am actually streaming a bunch of horror games over there as part of Courage Month. So if you guys want to see those, again, be sure to go check those out. Link is down in the description as per always. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this one. Whereas a Bob video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But regardless of whether or not to do any of those things, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!